Hello everyone. This presentation is about Brazil, its economy's inflation issues, and what I argue as possible solutions to this ongoing problem in South America's largest economy. Brazil is a major emerging market and the second biggest economy in the Western Hemisphere. As part of the BRIC Emerging Market Group, Brazil's diverse economy, massive labor force, and continued exponential growth have many economists predicting it to be one of the world's 5 largest economies in the next few decades. Before examining the contemporary issues, a little background information about Brazil's economic history is important for this examination. Brazil has long been a poster child of promising growth, failed expectations, and up and down boom-bust scenarios. For much of the time after World War II, Brazil implemented a high-growth strategy through import substitution industrialization, or ISI, which limits foreign dependence through nationalization, protectionist trade policies, industry subsidies, and overall internally focused state-led development. But as GDP diversified and the country experienced massive growth with industry and service, foreign investment interests shot up, ISI failed, current account deficits went up, and inflation skyrocketed. Brazil saw up and down periods of extreme growth and high stagnation through industry and agriculture according to its high dependence on the global economy. Decades of financial mismanagement and amounting foreign debt led to hyperinflation and skewed income distribution in the late 80s and early 90s. This sparked the Real Plan, which was instituted in 1994 to lessen inflation and stabilize the economy. It created a new currency called the Real, which was pegged to the US dollar 1-to-1 originally. Inflation stabilized relatively and FDI increased due to Brazil's continued growth. However, incidents like the Asian crisis of 1997 created reluctance to volatile emerging markets. So after planning further reforms, Brazil received a $42 billion IMF loan in 1998. In 1999, the central bank announced that the real would no longer be pegged to the US dollar and would instead be turned to a managed or dirty float. This alleviated FDI concerns, and Brazil paid back the IMF loan within a few years and increased their capital inflow potential. That brings us to the present day. The economic liberalization of the 1990s, coupled with capital incentives and headed by such aspects as mining, petroleum, agriculture, shipbuilding, telecommunications, and tourism, have led to Brazil having $350 billion of FDI at home annually, which nears the top 10 internationally. Large capital inflows like these have led to yet another inflation spike. These issues are exacerbated by rising global commodity prices. But Brazil battled through 4-digit inflationary spikes in the 80s and 90s. Why should they be worried about a 6.5% rate, even though it's the highest in 2 years? Because these are external pressures, and if they spike further, they're out of Brazil's control. The long-term credibility, competitiveness, and stability of the economy is at risk. So what should they do? On Wednesday, policymakers raised the interest rate in Brazil to 12%. Which makes it one of the highest in the world. Previously, it was at 11.75%. Other emerging markets like China and India raised their rates recently in order to combat these soaring global prices. As the issue unfolds over the coming months, we'll get to see how effective raising local interest rates are in combating the rise of global food and fuel prices. The raise should attract a flood of investment that could skyrocket the real and end up hurting manufacturing and agricultural competitiveness. Brazil has to undergo a unique balancing act. How can the central bank maintain exponential growth without being set back by global commodity price rises and expectations of another boom and bust? According to the IMF, Brazil will see an adverse impact of currency overvaluation on their external competitiveness and current account balances. Emerging markets are already bearing more than their share of the so-called global rebalancing. They cannot accept further overshooting of their exchange rates. I argue that the answer lies in smarter government spending, taxation on foreign speculative investment that has hurt competitiveness, and policy reforms that lead to protection against inflation and continued bubbles in both the short and the long term. President Dilma Rousseff needs to be more responsible with government spending In February, she pledged to slash around 50 billion reals or 30 billion US dollars from the budget. However, I argue that not enough is being done. Brazil should make more cuts and in every possible place. The government needs to be extremely frugal with discretionary spending in addition to lowering salaries. They also need to cut from soft infrastructure. By the way, hard infrastructure refers to the large physical networks necessary for the country's function, and soft infrastructure is all the aspects that maintain its health, economic, social, and cultural standards. So in order to stabilize the economy, social security and pensions may have to go down, and that will not be an easy task. Moreover, part of Brazil's education and training programs for the somewhat uneducated yet massive labor force should be put on hold. More important matters are at hand, and the country is in a tough yet fixable position. Overall, Brazil's 2011 spending is projected to increase by 10% from last year, and that's not too promising. In 2009, Brazil added small capital controls to the tune of a 2% tax on foreign investment. If they want to actually target inflation and slow the soaring real, that tax should increase. Even the IMF has stated that investment interest is so high that further taxation would not stymie Brazil's growth. Further restriction on capital inflows would also help to limit more currency appreciation with the new 12% interest rate. Brazil needs to look again at the long term, and heavier capital controls quickly become necessary. In addition to other inflation targeting, looking at the long term, heavier capital controls seem almost necessary for Brazil's economic stability, in addition to other fiscal responsibility systems and inflation targeting that they already have in place. Major policy reforms are on the horizon for Brazil. President Rousseff, a leftist, has admired some of the policies of her biggest trading partner, China. With a heavily diverse and growing economy, Brazil could do some overhaul with privatization and statist policies in certain sectors. ISI and other internalized development would mean Brazil reverting back to its old ways, but now an entirely different global economic climate. Destabilization, massive capital inflows, and inflation are pressuring Brazil to do something drastic. Heavily leftist and statist policy reforms would be tough, but the country's external pressure and continued presence in boom-bust scenarios is very, very troublesome and calls for some sort of solution. Perhaps Brazil is destined to continually fail its economic expectations, and this credit bubble is no different. People will continue to live through inflation just like they did in the last century, but Brazil will manage and continue its exponential growth. I disagree. I think that this time is different. It's a new situation. Brazil is a major global economic player, and external pressures like capital inflows and global commodity price rises are sparking the massive inflation. Major businesses and exporters are facing dire competitive disadvantages. China, India, and other emerging markets' presence challenge the government's hope to rise in the world economy even more and improve living conditions, where in Brazil 26% of people are below the poverty rate. So the country is very conflicted. Brazil would be wise to revert to more internal statist economic policies for the long term, cut spending, and heavily tax foreign investment. Brazil is under pressure in other ways too. As the host of the 2014 World Cup and the 2016 Summer Olympics, the country will be under record international scrutiny. So will Brazil address its pressing economic needs or continue to accept the inertial inflation that has plagued it for decades? Based on the evidence and reasoning that I have posited in today's presentation, I argue that unless Brazil quickly takes action, the old adage will stand. Brazil is the country and economy of the future, and it always will be. Thank you very much for watching.